Let's talk about creating. Every time I try to make something pure and creative, I end up poking holes in it, like a voodoo doll of my own half baked ideas. For example, if I'm writing a song and I realize where I got the inspiration for a specific line in that song, I will then proceed to label it as derivative and just stop altogether. Or as I'm writing the song, I'm already picturing how I would explain the song's meaning to those listening to it, as if my first ever recorded song would lead me to be interviewed on Genius. Even as I record this, I'm doing it with the audience and their judgmental thoughts in my mind. Note that this is called projection. All of these intellectual potholes quickly take the air out of the tires of my creative mobile, which I imagine is shaped like a hot dog for some reason. I don't know, maybe Freud has something to do with it. I can't help but feel as though I'm missing the point of creativity, which inherently is to create. We're at an interesting point in our lifespan where creativity and capitalism are so enmeshed that they're like those friends with benefits that spend so much time together that they're basically dating but won't admit it because of fear of boundaries. But this isn't an anti-capitalism rant. I'm not nearly educated enough to do that. And it's not a rant against friends with benefits either. Just do your thing and learn from it, I guess. This is a message to myself and maybe one other person that you're not creating to make money. If you do make money off your creation, that's dope. You're not even necessarily creating to be seen. You're creating because we as human beings are inherently creative. It's what we do. Create because there's an energy or a force within you that wants to create. And worry about the rest later. Get out of your own way and let the creativity flow. I'm talking to you, me. Welcome to my creation. Okay, hello and welcome to the very first episode of the kind of still unnamed podcast. I should probably think of a name for it quite soon. Working title, Dharma Drama. Uh, this episode features an interview with Dr. Fred Travis, who is a neuroscientist and professor at Maharishi International University, uh, which school that I am currently attending. He's been my professor several times, and I have had the pleasure of TAing for him. Man, I respect a lot. Just a great guy to ask questions to. Uh, the reason why I wanted to make my own introduction to this is just to introduce some terms that are spoken about in the interview, just for greater clarification. So, first of all, I want to say that we are both of us when we talk, we are coming from the viewpoint, or we'll say the paradigm, is a term you'll probably hear me use a lot, of Vedic science, specifically what they would call Maharishi Vedic science. This is oftentimes associated with transcendental meditation just because Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the guy who brought transcendental meditation from the East to the West. He also kind of introduced a lot of this Vedic science. He tried to make the reason it's called Vedic science is because it's based off the Vedas, but he tried to demystify it a bit and try to introduce as much modern scientific inquiry into the Vedas as possible. I think because this was done in the 70s and it was just sort of the language of the time. I think perhaps now people, especially young people, are more open to more mystical and spiritual terms. At that time, it was much easier. Probably to speak in a language of science, so you wouldn't get labeled as hippie or counterculture or whatever. So we call it Vedic science. It is based off the Vedas, which I'm realizing now that I have a lot more to explain than I thought. So it's based off the Vedas, which you can say on one hand are just a series of books, um, On another hand, what we say the Vedas are is the fluctuations of an underlying unified field. And so now we'll kind of cross into the quantum physics of it all a little bit. So quantum physics, and specifically string theory, tells us now that as we go deeper and deeper into the fundamental constituents of manifestation, we get less and less concrete, and we get more and more abstract. I mean, we could even when in high school you learn about the atomic level and the subatomic level, and how it's just these more or less balls that are like rotating around and bouncing off of each other. And this is the classical viewpoint of matter, is that it's these billiard balls kind of bouncing off of each other and stuff. Uh, but quantum physics, quantum mechanics as well, tells us that there's a little more to it, that these balls are less localized and discrete, and more waves of a underlying field. And ultimately, what unified field theory would tell us, which is what's sort of taught at our university, and its biggest proponent is Dr. John Hagelin, who's the dean of our university. That tells us that these different fields, like the electromagnetic field, the gravitational field, are all ultimately one field in which these waves, or we'll say now superstrings, come out of. And so I say all that not to give you a crash course in quantum physics, but to tell you that as we go deeper and deeper down, we find that matter is actually more just vibrations of something. Of what? Of They're just vibrations. They're vibrations that ultimately create something concrete and tangible, like this camera that I'm recording on. So we can think of it even more like ideas. So we're made of like ideas. So the point is, the Vedas, what is written down in the Vedas in Sanskrit, they would say the language of Sanskrit is cognition, is someone tapping into these vibrations of the superstring and then speaking them out loud, and then ultimately these are written down into books. But really, the value in the Vedas comes not in the content, although there is value in the content, but it comes from the the vibrations themselves, if that makes sense. It probably doesn't, but if it makes like 25% more sense than it did when I started, then I'm doing my job. So we're coming at everything from a Vedic science perspective, and within that, we'll use some terms. First of all, the higher states of consciousness. I think you could probably, if you had never heard that before, you could probably deduce what it means. We talk about the fourth state of consciousness, the fifth state of consciousness. So when we meditate and we transcend all thoughts and concepts, we are in many ways tapping into that unified field. That is called the fourth state of consciousness. And the reason they're able to call it the fourth state of consciousness is because a lot of the work that the scientists that are involved with the TM foundation, TM movement, a lot of the work they've done has showed significantly different brain patterns in those that are meditating than those just with their eyes closed, for instance. And so that's what they'd call the fourth state. That's when you're meditating. Now, fifth state is when it gets kind of wacky. That's when that state of we'll say like restful alertness, that state of tapping into unity is present at all times, but you're also acting at the same time. So it's not like a split consciousness. It's not like part of you is uh, meditating and part of you is acting, but in that it doesn't feel like half of you is doing one thing and half of doing the other. But in a way, you have this this natural meditative state even while you're doing things. And so that's just to explain higher states of consciousness, and it's really interesting. They've done lots of EEG tests, and for those who don't know, EEG is just like measuring the little brain electrical activity, kind of figure out what's happening in there, because it turns out the brain's a really difficult thing to understand. So when he talks about higher states, that's what he's speaking about. So that's sort of, um, in my opinion, that's kind of the evolution of humans, and that's it. We're all we all have this force that's pushing us towards evolving into higher states of consciousness, and it doesn't mean necessarily that everyone will do that through TM, but it means that there's something within us that wants to grow into that higher state, that wants to sort of unfold the natural potential of each one of our individual selves, but also the universal self, and sort of combine those two things. And that leads me into Dharma, which we would describe as the force of evolution. And it's often it's often used to just to describe like a path, like your dharma is like your path, or your if you're doing something that is like, this is what I should be doing in life, then that would be your dharma. And I think it could definitely be used to say that as well, but ultimately what we describe dharma as is like this force of evolution pushing you that's pushing you forward towards evolution. And uh, I've heard like the metaphor of Maharishi used it in a video of there's like the donkey, and then when it's going up the mountain and when it stops, it gets like whipped to keep going. And that's sort of like what Dharma does. That's what the force of evolution does to us. When we stand still or when we go against it, we feel resistance. Uh, that's why it's natural for us to move in a direction of flow, move in a direction of self improvement, and why it's painful for us and it causes suffering for us to go against that flow. So it's kind of like going with the current of a stream versus trying to swim against it, which, if you've ever tried, is quite hard. So that's when we say dharma, that's what we say. But like I said, it's used interchangeably, more or less, uh, to like mean just like a path, because that is what it is. It's this flow of evolution within you, leading you to exactly what you should be doing. Not that there's like one thing that you need to do, but that like ultimately, if you're fulfilling unfolding your own potential, it's going to lead you to exactly what would be the best for you, your own evolution, your own ultimate fulfillment, but also like the fulfillment of humanity, and furthermore the universe. So that's just a little bit of terminology for the interview coming up. I will in future podcasts go into more description of these higher states, also of Dharma, but for now that's just a very generalized explanation. So enjoy the interview with Fred Travis. This is my first interview, so I was a little bit nervous going in, but thankfully he's a very personable guy and a person that I'm already comfortable talking with. So I think it went quite well. So he's got a lot to say. So yeah, enjoy the interview. Thanks. All right, and we're recording. Welcome to another or the first interview, depending on when I decide to post this in what order relative to the other interviews. Um, this is my first guest I will introduce, and it is my pleasure to introduce a man who is a living legend around the halls of Maharishi International University. A man whose research into TM and its effects will be the giant shoulders upon which all future research will stand upon. A man who once heard Bruce Lee say, "Be like water," and then went on to write the book, "Your Brain is a River, Not a Rock," ensuring us we are not as dumb as rocks. Yes, even you, a man for whom I have an immense amount of respect for. Please welcome Dr. Fred Travis.
Thank you, Dylan. That was quite a euphoric narrative. Thank you.
Oh, only the best. Only the best. I if I could write more, I would.
Mm.
But hopefully that captured how I feel about you. It's an honor to have this time to just pick your brain and ask you some questions. I feel lucky just to have an open space because you're quite a busy person typically. So it's hard to just ask you a bunch of questions in a row because you're such a wealth of knowledge that oftentimes I'd like to.
Well, thank you. This is a gap time. I look forward to thinking with you.
Yes, and so I'd like to just start out about hearing just a little bit about your story, uh, maybe where you grew up, but more specifically how you found TM and how you found your field of study, which I'd say neuroscience. It feels almost like I'm reducing it to something less than it is by saying neuroscience because you study so much, such a broad range of stuff. But yeah, if you could just share a little bit about how you came to find that and things in your life that led you to finding these things.
So, where should we begin?
Wherever
Um,
you want.
yes. Psychology today at Cornell. Yeah, so I was in Cornell University, design environmental analysis field. I was on an advanced program for teachers, the TM program. And just before I left, Psychology Today came out with an article talking about creativity. And the article went on to say that if you're able to focus, typically creativity is lower. Because to be creative, you have to play with ideas, you have to explore different areas. And if you're able to focus, not allow your mind to move and to play with ideas, the creative solutions are less. Then went on to say transcendental meditation is a meditation procedure that improves focus after meditation. Therefore, if you practice TM, your creativity will be less. No data to support it, just sort of out of the blue. So I was sitting there in the program, meditating, and that article would come to mind, and then the thought would come, someone needs to write an article just refuting him. And then a few days later, the thought came, who's going to write this article? And then this little thought came, you're going to, Fred. And that started it. I was in a design field, so I was in touch with people who were highly creative, and I gave them baseline creativity tests. It was a time when many people were starting TM practice. And so I tested them also after they learned TM and found out that indeed creativity as measured by the Torrance test was much higher after TM. And I published it. And that was sort of just sitting there, a little seed in the ocean. And I was with my wife, we were teaching transcendental meditation on a local level, Ithaca, and then going to the larger national level. And the thought came, I should really do something. And just at that point, the PhD in psychology was announced at Maharishi International University. This was 1983. And it really fit what I wanted to do. I was really enjoying my responsibilities and my tasks, but there was something more I wanted to do. It was a very interesting experience where you're fulfilled in what you're doing, but you want to grow more. Nature is saying there's something more that you can do. And so I applied for the PhD, and because I had this published article, they actually allowed me to come in. So there I am taking the psychology courses, really just thoroughly enjoying it, looking at cognitive systems and so on. Meanwhile, my wife was the administrator for David Orm Johnson, who had a grant to analyze EEG. He's even busier then than I am now. And so he asked Nita to do the analysis. She's an engineer. So and this is the time when you didn't have a continuous line on the computer screen, but it was digitized by asterisks. So what you do with digitization is if you get a signal which is too fast, then the digitization rate, it actually is called aliasing. It folds down, you get all of these signals which are really not there in the EEG. So you can change your screen resolution and you'll change what you see on the screen. Anyways, my wife is an engineer, but she never really got electrical engineering. And so she wasn't making much progress. So she came home one Saturday and we were discussing what was happening. And She said, Fred, would you like to analyze this EEG for David? Now, all the PhD students were working with other faculty, so it's a reasonable thing to say. And being a good husband, I said, yes, dear, I'd love to. And I did, and I did. Um, what you have with EEG is something you can hold. It's almost concrete. And what it's giving a concrete picture of is something very abstract, the quality of consciousness of the individual, something that you cannot hold, that you cannot touch. But by looking at the functioning of the brain, which is the interface, and as the interface changes, so our experience changes, you get a very objective picture into what's going on in the individual. So I started doing that and I was hooked. Um, I'm a very concrete person. I remodeled homes we live in. I built a garage for the house that we live in, built retaining walls. I like to do things. I like to create physical objects. And that desire is very much satisfied by being able to look at the EEG in many different ways, to look very deeply into what's happening in a person's own experience during TM practice, what's happening over time, or growth of higher states, and so on. So that's how I got to where I am here.
Wait, so you mentioned sort of this appeal that you have towards the concreteness, maybe taking something that might be abstract and making it something that that can be objectively verified in some way. And this more or less being a calling of yours. I mean, the way you describe it, it sounds almost exactly like a calling. It was a call to action. You, you called yourself into action. You're like, someone has to do this. Oh wait, that someone is me, I guess. So I'm curious now, when you look back on your childhood and teenage years, adolescence and all that stuff, do you see the, this call to action almost forming, or like the interests being formed either by your environment or formed innately within yourself towards what you ultimately found, which is EEG?
I always have been interested in building things. When I was 3, my mom would put me outside with a handful of nails and a board and a hammer. And I would just pound them in and turn it over and pound them out. So I have always liked to be physically involved. So that's always been there.
Hmm.
And I've always been interested in why things work, why people do things. When I was maybe 12 or something, I was down at a family gathering and there was people I didn't know, and I was down on the dock and this 3-year-old child fell off the dock into the water. So I jumped in, I saved him, and of course I was God to him. He would just not let go of me. And I went back and I told his parents what he did and so on. And I put out my arms for him to jump. And I was thinking, if I don't catch him, what will he do? Honest. So jumped, I didn't catch him, he ran to the ground, he cried, etc. But it's that orientation. Why do things happen? Why do people do the things they do?
Hmm.
Um, I was part of I dropped out of college after 2 years and joined a theater group, and it was an experimental mission of the Methodist Church, and it was headed by a minister who was in theater for 20 years, felt called to become a minister, went into seminary, came out, and he found he was stilted trying to preach the same way to all of the people because they could take the information in, but it had to come from different angles. So he wrote what he wanted to say into plays, and it's called the Fisherman Players. So we'd do the plays, and afterwards we would have coffee houses and people would talk. And that was sort of I really enjoyed that because I was thinking and listening, trying to understand people's points of view and so on. And then as part of the theater group, I was stage manager. Summer stock, fall, winter, and spring, we go up and down the eastern seaboard. We get to a place at 2 in the afternoon, 7 at night. We'd have to have a show up in those 5 hours. We'd have to get the lights, the props, decide where the entrances would be, and so on. Some days it was really easy. It was just like a checklist, and you could see what had to be done. Some days it was like walking through mud. It was a fog. So I really experienced that I was more in touch with that quiet, alert, more expanded sense of who I was sometime than others. And that's what prompted me to learn transcendental meditation and talking about full range of the mind and so on. It really fit my experience. And so I was meditating now, practicing TM. Then I went back to college and did the creativity and TM study and so on. But it was always those things of being something very hands-on, design, environmental analysis, very hands-on, but also understanding what's the underlying dynamics. And it just sort of settled into EEG. It's so funny that major life changes in direction, I find don't happen in sort of a big, obvious way. It's by little ideas. It's by little fine level of feeling, oh, this doesn't feel right. Or, yeah, I think this is comfortable. And I think that's because where the impulses to make major changes are coming from is not from our individual intellect, which is loud and raucous and harsh and pushing. It comes from finest level of intuition. It comes from where the individual self is emerging from the transcendent. And the very faint bubble is a whole bubble of pure consciousness, but it's not loud, it's not dominant, it's not overwhelming. It's just there is a faint idea. And then if you can be aware, in touch with that and pick it up, and then you can make those small directions, a few degrees, 5 degrees, 10 degrees. And then over time you find that's where you want to go, and you're a mile from where you would have been. So that's what I've noticed.
That's a really interesting perspective on it. Did you notice that fine feeling, we'll call it, happen more after you started practicing transcendental meditation?
Um, Probably it did, but Dylan, you don't, I don't really know how I was experiencing a week ago.
Hmm.
What was happening last Tuesday? And how was I feeling and alert and so on, let alone a decade ago, let alone longer. I think what's happening with TM is it's like a flower opening up. So definitely there's more sensitivity to those underlying principles and forces that are around us. And I'm sure it's more than it was before. But on the same level, there's part of me that was there when I was a teenager. It's not my intellect, it's not even my individual ego. It's a very deep sense of self is there. But exactly, what was the expression? Um, I don't know.
Hmm. Yeah, it's also it makes me think about these two kind of opposite forces. I mean, I say opposite, but I do feel like they can exist alongside each other, and that is like the intellect, and then this, we'll once again refer to it as fine feeling. You can say like intuition, but this very deep level of one's being that is, connected to this ocean of everyone else's being and everything. Um, and they oftentimes become opposed to each other because the intellect it wants to understand and so therefore wants comfortable wants what is understandable. And so I know for me I can find myself in times where I'm following my listening to my intellect so much and I'm just doing the same thing over and over again, and it's not what many would refer to as following your heart, which is kind of following something that is not within the realm of comfort, within the scope of what your intellect currently understands. So, were you, when you look back on it, were you always kind of someone who tended more towards the following the heart versus the intellect?
Um, I think that is what's grown with TM practice because
Hmm.
as a teenager, it's ups and downs and and we know what's happening with the teenager, their whole brain, the emotions are wired. They're having a bigger input on your decision making than the intellect, and so your emotions take you this way and that way and this way, and we're told, oh no, use your intellect, live by your intellect, but that's missing what the heart is bringing, the fine feeling, which is a global evaluation.
Hmm.
And I think what grows, especially with regular transcending, is those two can become integrated because it's the emotions which are driving the intellect, emotions are saying where to look, what's important, but that the intellect is actually doing the steps to get it done. And so they both need to be there. And um, I'm constantly watching fine level feeling comes, then the intellect rises up. No, because don't do, shoulds, coulds, and so on. And then you watch and you say, oh yeah, fine level feeling was important. I think that's part of what we're learning as we're going through life. And so where you can be comfortable with a fine thought comes and the intellect says no, you say, well, I'm going to try it. And so you try
Mm.
to take one step. If you try to analyze it at the moment, you get into analysis paralysis. Should I go? Should I stay? Should I major? And the intellect can always come up with both points of view. That's what it's meant to do. And it's there to protect us. It's there to
Mm.
allow us to discriminate right and wrong, to discriminate where I should be going. But that discrimination is really best on the feeling level that moves through it. But I really resonate with what you're saying. Those two impulses are constantly there. And that's part of the game of life. I think that's what we're here to master, to integrate those two.
Hmm. And so, is the fulfillment of that what we would call higher states of consciousness? Is that in many ways like a rectification of these two forces, or at least like a perfect balance, we'll say, of these two forces?
It's very intriguing because in the first higher state, cosmic consciousness, you're separating all of the individual activity, individual mind, intellect, heart, ego is being separate from who you are. Now you are that underlying field of being, of wholeness of your consciousness, completely stable. Everything else is going on. That wholeness of self is moving through and it's driving the intellect. And in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 71, Maharishi speaks about this. He says, and in cosmic consciousness, the individual ego continues to function, but now it's a divine will functioning through it. The divine will, that field from pure consciousness going through it. And it's going by almost by itself. You don't really know why. You don't see the steps that are there, but something happens. There's a situation, you experience a situation, the fine level of feeling says go, and then it becomes expressed in the ego and intellect. You're just watching this whole play going on. So it's almost as though that question disappears in enlightenment.
Hmm.
It's because now the whole individuality is functioning as a whole as the self is settled in its own unbounded nature. And then growth of, GC and God consciousness and unity consciousness, it's a whole different perspective happening. It's beyond mind and intellect. That's really, I think, what we're caught up in waking state and what we begin to see being brought together into a whole as we're growing towards enlightenment. That's my perspective.
Hmm. It's a very good perspective. I buy it. It resonates with me. So, I'd like to actually go back to you were mentioning how it's not so much like maybe we what we'll say is the search for one's dharma or the alignment in life that one experiences doesn't generally happen in like very big fell swoops, but rather maybe like smaller impulses here and there. And I'm curious, after you did the whole EEG thing and you're kind of like, wow, this is really cool and I'm really good at this. This seems to be some sort of the in this class I'm doing, we do the Ikigai, which is like what the world needs, what I'm passionate about, that whole Venn diagram.
Yeah.
And so the EEG, I would imagine, fits probably relatively in the square in the center of your Venn diagram. So now when you found that did you notice that the impulses of alignment of, okay, maybe I need to change this or do this lessened in that you were like, ah, this is it. Like I kind of it's just like pushing forward on this path? Or was there still and is there still kind of this like continuous adjusting of the direction you're going with things?
Yeah, it's so intriguing. I was just thinking about the questions you had sent to me and about Dharma and so on, and intellectually I understand it. And that activity which allows you to be fulfilled and allows you to grow towards higher states as you nourish others around you. And you know on Dharma because as you're going in that direction, you get this warmed value. And as an intellectual description, that's true, but in terms of experience, I can't really pinpoint it functioning in a specific force or a specific way.
Mm.
Um, I think primarily it's on that fine level of feeling of intuition, and at least I didn't notice it as, okay, this is dharmic. I should go in this direction because of some feedback that I'm getting. But it's just the natural tendency of life is to grow. You grow towards that which is most charming. And that's what's happening. That's what's driving you forward in a very simple way. Not sort of clear intellective steps, but yes, I'm going to go here. And then you just continue to go in that direction. And then looking back, you can say, yes, this must be my dharma. Yes, I do enjoy it. Yes, it fits descriptions of it. But in the process of living life, you're always making decisions.
Mm.
Okay, you
Mm.
wake up. Should I lie here for 10 more minutes or should I get up? Should I take a walk? Oh, it looks like it's going to rain. Maybe I'll do some stuff outside in the morning. You're constantly making these little decisions. And those little decisions, I think, do add up and become what is the flow of Dharma. And the flow of Dharma will be that idea, that feeling that comes to mind that just then directs you forward. I mean, very little things. I had to thought, I should really cut the lawn. So I went out and cut the lawn. 3 hours later, we're putting up solar array. 3 hours later, people came by to look at how to put up the solar array. And here's this nicely cut space. Here's all the pegs where the solar array is going to be. I mean, just on that simple example. Or you need some information. And somebody sends you an article. Look at this great article I just found. And so there is that fluidity of action. And I see that as what's the practical benefit of being in Dharma. It's
Mm.
just
Mm.
life is fluid. You're constantly making decisions. You're constantly having to decide one or the other because we're in the relative. We can't do all things. And we're constantly making decisions. And what is guiding that is a fine level of feeling. And if that's in tune with Dharma, that whole process just is much smoother.
Mm. I have to imagine that when you say much smoother, because we have to, when we talk about life and existence, it's all so interconnected that smoother not only means smoother in terms of ease of action for you, or maybe not ease, but just rightness, right feeling of action for you. But also, I mean, you mentioned that you didn't you can't really think of any like major feedback that you got that okay, this is dharmic for me. But from my feeling that there is even the example you gave, you cut the lawn and then this person came over afterwards, which is almost a reinforcement. It's the interconnectedness of things. It was like, okay, I did this for this person, so now it can become an intellectual thing at that point because you're looking back on it and you're going, that was probably the right decision to make because I cut the grass and then this person came by and it was easier for them. Now I don't know how much value there is in thinking about it so much, but perhaps that can be useful to allow yourself to orient to maybe where you are in terms of how dharmic your actions are in life. Whereas if you hadn't cut the grass, there may have been some negative feedback, or like you said, it's just a bunch of decisions we make. So if we keep making a bunch of, we'll say, wrong decisions, I mean, it's all just karma, we'll get some sort of feedback that maybe if the feedback doesn't end with the results that we want, then we know that the actions we did were not the actions that we want to do. And so it seems to me that there is some semblance of external feedback to one's actions. So when you began doing EEG, can you think back to any like, oh, all of a sudden people kept asking me to do more EEG, or any examples of maybe at ease or flow of continuing on that path?
Um, the one was in the about 2000. And this is when there was the understanding that EEG demonstrations are a powerful way to understand what's happening during TM. So suddenly, as you say, people were calling me, oh, David Lynch is on a tour. Can you go with him for 2 weeks? Can you come here to Israel? And so on. And I remember noting that and thinking, I'm doing the same thing I've been doing for the last 10 years. And now people like it. And
Mm.
it was almost humorous, to see that happen. Because definitely our activity is in the larger scope of the system around us, and we're fundamentally need to be self-referral. What needs to be done at this point in time? And that's where the fine feeling level is so important.
Mm.
And then you do it, and if other people like it, it's fine. If people don't like it, it's fine. You just keep on going on that. So it's really intriguing. It's a difference between being self-referral and being other referral. If you look outside
Mm.
too much for signs, suddenly you stop looking inside and being sensitive. Okay, what should I do? And not even asking what you should do, but you just walk up and you go to the door and the thought comes, okay, what should you do? So that flow through life without complexity. And then you can look at in a larger context. Oh yeah, this is expanding this area of research. The whole point of hyperscanning that we're looking at now. What's the EEG coherence between two types of people? It happened very organically. That became part of the news, and then
Mm.
um, Bernard Marcus had created simple EEG sets so we can record the EEG from two people. And okay, now this course is coming up in India with 10,000 people. Let's look at the brain-to-brain synchrony between non-meditators. The whole thing developed, and you could see as it being part of what I've done before, part of Dharma. But it wasn't premeditated. Um,
Mm.
it's more doing what's needed for the need of the time, and then that's where you start to flow and move.
Mm. So the decision and the continuous decisions really come intrinsically, come from within rather than externally. So you were doing the EEG studies because you felt it was the right thing to do, not because you were analyzing what the world needs right now, what I should do. Because maybe at the time, the world didn't seem like it was asking for it very much for about 10 years, and then all of a sudden it was. But you were ready when it was because you had been following the fine feeling level to that point.
It's a good wholeness, good summary. Yeah.
That's great. That's awesome. I would like to ask some of your favorite. It's probably hard for you to pick favorites out of the many research studies you've done with transcendental meditation and EEG. Do you have some that are the first one you tell people about whenever you're kind of giving them the elevator pitch about what you do?
One of the very first ones is three categories of meditation, because meditation is now a household word, but because of that, everything is put under the same umbrella. And so that's the first one. The second one, I think, is the effortlessness paper, because it's a whole new concept to get something valuable by doing nothing. And you can think about it, oh, give me a break. You close your eyes and you're just napping, you're just daydreaming. If you're not doing anything, how can you be getting anything worthwhile? You've taken the blue pill. How can you get everything by doing nothing? And this whole understanding is from the world of the intellect. And you need to control and manipulate and clearly focus on what's going on. But the whole idea, if you can use a tendency of nature, the natural tendency of the mind to expand, and if you're using a natural tendency, it's going to go most economically, most quickly to the goal, which is unbounded awareness. And it's an idea so far from people's experience that they can't accept it, and they almost don't even hear it. I was at a conference, pediatrics, TM, talked about TM and children growing up and everything. And I talked about three categories of meditation and focus attention, open monitoring, automatic self-transcending. Talked about to transcend, to go beyond the thinking level, it has to be automatic. If there's any control or evaluation, the mind's just not going to expand. I gave research showing that in terms of there's no novice expert dichotomy in TM, people master quickly and so on. The next person who got up said, there's three categories of meditation. I remember I sort of glowed inside. Wow, this is great. And then he said, one of them is focused attention, and began to glow a little bit higher. And he said, an example of focused attention is transcendental meditation. Right after I spoke. And so I saw him in the hotel lobby, and I walked up to him, thanked him for his talk, and commented that I noticed you put transcendental meditation in the category of focused attention. What was the evidence for this? And he hemmed and hawed and said, well, it's after 10 or 15 years, it becomes effortless. After all, how can you pick up a mantra without some effort? And I realized then that this concept of effortlessness had to be dealt with in a scientific way. So that's a part of the effortless paper. There's a specific.
It is at this point that the worst thing that could have possibly happened. My internet went out. I think maybe I mentioned during the interview that we were in the middle of a severe thunderstorm warning. So it caught up to me at least for a few moments, but we were able to reconnect. Just wanted to let you know that that's why there's kind of an awkward stitch here between these two parts of the interviews. It's not because me or Fred Travis said something that was so reprehensible that I needed to edit it out. Um, thus, unless we would get canceled or whatever. So yeah, here's the rest of the interview. Sorry.
Then
Okay. All right. So we'll finish the. So you were talking about the conference, the three different types of meditation, and then this guy who just right after you had said that it was
yeah,
effortless,
yeah,
completely just negates everything you just said.
yeah, it was so funny. So I said, haven't we talked about this before? After 10, 15, 20 years, yeah, it becomes effortless. But how can you effortlessly pick up the mantra? And I told him it does take some time. It takes about 3 minutes. And I remember the look on his face, and I turned away and realized then that we had to speak about this, discuss effortlessness in a scientific arena. And that's where I came onto the default mode network. It's a part of the brain that's active when the mind is not directed. You're just freely exploring ideas. It's also seen when you're thinking about yourself. It's also seen when you're in the zone, when your whole attention is attracted to the activity you're doing and you're not aware of the time and so on. When you focus the mind, when you control the mind, default mode network goes down. And what's found, all other meditations report default mode network goes down. And so I came back and looked at 87 subjects in our database from a few months to 5 years TM practice. I looked at self-reported experiences of transcending. No significant difference over that 5-year period. Been meditating a few months or 5 years. And that suggests that, yes, whatever technique you're using, you must master it very quickly. And if it is a natural tendency of the mind, additional practice doesn't make it go any better. And then we looked at the activity in this default mode network, and we found that it remained high during TM. And it was similar to what's seen just during eyes closed when the mind is just easy. So those are the two that I like to bring out mostly. The third is higher states of consciousness. What has happened is TM has been placed in the arena of good rest, exercise, lifestyle, so on. But the fact that TM is leading to a fundamentally different state, the fourth state, an integration of this with daily activity leads to higher states, cosmic consciousness, and so on. this needs to be clearly delineated. We have papers in 2000 and 2004, 2002, 2004, 2014. Right now, we have 72 individuals we're looking at. But I think this is the most important area of research for TM because people have to realize that A, there is a part of themselves which is unbounded outside of time and space. It's a universal nature. They can easily contact it and they can bring it into daily activity. And that this is the real purpose of meditation practice. It's okay if it helps you focus, okay, it helps you be just mindful of what's around you so you're not caught up in activity. But most fundamentally, it's changing our sense of self. So I think those are the three that I would always bring up.
Yeah, definitely the highlights. If you needed a crash course on everything transcendental meditation in terms of the scientific studies, those would be it. Uh, so meditate and yeah, and that fine feeling will hopefully become stronger and will become more of a guiding light for you in life.
Great wholeness, Dylan. Very good.
All right, well, thank you very much. Sorry for the internet snafu there at the end, but it seems like we landed the plane in the
I
end,
think we
so it,
did.
it all worked out. So thank you very much for coming on,
Yeah.
and yeah,
Enjoy your
I'm
final
sure.
project.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you very much, and I'll let you know how it goes.
Okay. All the best.
Bye
Bye.
now. Well, I hope you enjoyed the interview and the show altogether. If you did enjoy it, it's only going to get better from here. This is obviously episode one, and like with everything in life, you just learn as you go. So I've already got the interview for episode two banked, and it's a good one. So you should stay tuned for that. Uh, yeah, otherwise, thanks if you listened all the way through and are hearing this. Thank you. If you just skipped to the end for whatever reason, thanks for caring enough to skip to the end. And we will see you next time. Bye.